Thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Leah and Donna, for allowing me to join you. I'm so excited to be here with you all and helping you all get ready for this annual performance report. Um, we didn't have a presentation for this particular session because there's still quite a few unknowns. Up until yesterday, I was able to see the TRIO homepage and I was able to see the trio.ed.gov, and today it's closed down. So I don't know if it's because they're making some updates, but I'm certain it has to do with our continued, absence out there right now with the government shutdown. But we know that we have to do our due diligence and get ready with this annual performance report. So I'm excited that we'll be able to go ahead and get you ready. And with respect to who I am, I'm Maria de Lourdes Zavala, and I've been in TRIO for 39 years. And I've been doing the annual performance report and some training on the annual performance report since we changed to this type of report, where before we had a narrative and now we have this Excel file that we upload, kind of followed that trajectory that Student Support Services was doing back in 1999. And then we kind of took it on the road back in 1999 and 2000. So I'm excited to be helping you all and getting you all ready for this year's APR. So having mentioned the upward bound APR that Lisa said, I love it. And yes, I do. It's like kind of like that. We're going to tell in this Excel file the story about all of this wonderful success that Upward Bound has had. And so we'll continue working with that process until it changes or something changes about it. So what we'll actually do is, because we don't have I want to just kind of make a couple of notes since we don't have that presentation, that this year is critical. It's critical because it's a prior experience year. Meaning that we have an opportunity to earn 15 prior experience points that will be averaged in for future grants. We're anticipating that, from what I had seen over the last few days, that this APR will most likely be due sometime in January. And so the contractors and what they had previously on their site was that it would most likely go live sometime in December, January-ish, and be due then. And so we've typically had about between 30 to 40 days to get this done, but that shouldn't stop us from getting this APR done because most of the information that we need is already available. So we're just going to go ahead and spend our time getting ready to submit this annual performance report and then wait for the APR website to go live. So we need other things and shift our focus to the current delivery of services rather than waiting for this to go live. So let's just go ahead and get it done.
Correct. And just want to let folks know Q&A. I will be doing Q&A, so please put all your questions in the Q&A, and I will answer as much as I can, and then we'll save some for the very end. Okay, thanks.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Lisa. So, and as we think about this particular APR, something that will be important for you to do, though, is if you're new, if this is the first time that you are submitting, if you are a new director, if you have a new certifying official, then those are some things that you will want to make sure that as soon as that APR website goes live, that you log in and that you establish some permissions that need to be had in order for you to gain access to the APR website. Many of those will require approvals, and so this is why we've seen a change in that published date of the APR, because we need the department, especially our program specialists, to go ahead and give us those assigned permissions if we're new. So go ahead and do that once the APR website goes live. The other reason that you'll want to do that is that even if you're continuing, log in right away so that you can download your Excel file, especially if you don't have it from last year's annual performance report. The Excel file that will include the names of all of those students that you're required to report on. If you prepare your file and it doesn't match that downloaded list, then you won't be able to proceed until you reconcile both those lists and get all of the students on your new Excel file that you will upload to the APR website for APR submission and review. Okay, so those are really the only points that we want to make. And then we want to spend much more of this time, of course, looking at the record structure. Okay. So when you log into the Upward Bound annual performance reports, there's going to be a couple of different tabs. And one of the first tabs that we're going to take a look at is the project identification in section 1. And so the form that we have, and luckily Lisa has provided these materials for you, because with the APR website down, you cannot download any of that information, nor even prior to today was the old annual performance reports found on that website. So please use the ones that we provided for you. What we did was go ahead and update the program year so as to reflect that this is the 24-25 reporting period. Okay. In section 1, a lot of the information when you do log into the APR web portal will be pre-populated. So you will find some information where you will fill out some details regarding the project itself. Again, pre-populated with your PR number and the director's information. The one thing that will not be filled in is the information regarding your project characteristics, which you'll need to go ahead and update, and also the data entry person. Now, when you look at this particular section 1, there may be some additional changes. Those first changes may be with respect to your program, and most specifically, if you had a June 1 start date, and if you happen to, in this particular year, decided to go to a September 1 start date. Because last year we saw that there were some projects that did this, and a couple of the fields got updated so as to allow these projects to identify, for example, that they now had 2 summer residential programs in the same reporting period. So you'll notice last year we saw that they had, these are students and projects that could have participated in the summer of 24 and 25. So hopefully we'll see that updated if this is the case that you need to look at for your project and report accordingly. You'll also notice that because of those changes, there were a couple more questions we had. How many weeks did your program last during the summer if it was in 24 and 25? And did you have a bridge program in 24-25? So these are some changes that we anticipate seeing in the form and the instructions for especially this year once they do come out. We just don't know when, of course, those will be published. But you want to continue to manage and monitor that site and your database for 24-25 at the trio.ed.gov website. Okay. There are additional questions that you'll have to respond to regarding how often you meet with your students. And then, of course, who is the data entry person? Similar to last year, we will be required to certify and agree to a warning digitally. And this is why it's so important for you all to ensure that you have identified who your director is, if it's a new director, and or if it's a new certifying official. Because both these individuals, in order to gain access and or to fully submit your annual performance report, will have to log in to certify that the information, to the best of your knowledge, of information included on this Excel spreadsheet that you're going to upload to the APR website is readily verifiable, meaning that you have the documentation to support what has been reported in the event of an audit. You also will through your digital signatures by the director and the certifying official, indicate that you understand that there is a warning, that if any information is false, then you're subject to penalties, which could include fines, imprisonment, or both. Okay. We also know that within the regulations and OMB that there are other circumstances or things that could happen if we're found to have misrepresented our outcomes in this report. So it's important to know that we have most of that information readily available and is verifiable. Okay. So again, this is all done through the APR submission process. We no longer have an opportunity to scan the document and upload it as we had in the past. Now it's all done digitally. We were also notified a couple years ago by the Department of Education that in some of those instances, that this particular information had to be certified within 2 days. However, they told us that most likely we would be moving to having an immediate certification once the director had submitted the annual performance report. So please, once the instructions are posted by the Department of Education, read those carefully so that you know when you need to submit the signatures, the data submission, and when those letters also have, excuse me, those reports also have to be certified by your certifying official. Okay, because those are still all up in the air. But hopefully we'll hear those soon once everything is up and running at the Department of Ed. Okay. Some other things that we'll have to respond to within this section 1 include our responses to the competitive preference priorities. Now, those competitive preference priorities are updates, something you might have reported on, or if you would change something about those competitive preference priorities and how you implemented them in 24-25. But you'll want to ensure that you update the information and provide some updated numbers as to how many students actually received some of those services that you outlined in your specific competitive priorities. I'm not going to go over them individually because many of us wrote different priorities and or address different circumstances or activities. So you need to make sure that you go back and you have a really good understanding about what you wrote about in these competitive preference priorities so that you can provide a response to these questions. You'll notice that the department wants to know, but they really don't want to know, right? So they only give you an opportunity to use 500 words or less to describe your activities. In these instances, it might be best to go back and take a look again what you reported in 23-24 and update the content as needed. I often use Word so that I can copy and paste and make sure that I do a word count because I don't want to have to retype all of this in the portal itself. So please use some tips, that might be helpful to helping you respond to these competitive preference priorities. You'll also note that each one of these allow you to respond to those CPPs, and you also have an opportunity to describe them again in 500 words or less.
Lourdes, when you get a chance, I just wanted to let you know that Donna's going to be launching a poll, just so you don't are surprised by it. We're going to find out how long, if this is our first APR and what database they're utilizing. Okay, just letting you know. Thanks.
Okay, great. I think the one thing that, and maybe Lisa, you can address this kind of like when we have the Q&A, because I know we still have to go through all of the fields of data. But I think one of the areas of caution that we've been trying to express is most explicitly what you define within these activities that might allude to any DEI. Just be very careful with what you're writing in here. Again, kind of read those with a fine-tooth comb as you're going through it, and anything you responded to in the past, because we don't know how the current administration is going to look at your responses. Okay, so I think that's probably the one thing that I want to mention about these CPPs is to read very carefully what you're writing in them. Okay, let's go ahead and go to the next section. In section 1, part 3, this is where we will identify the project schools that you worked at. It's important to note that as we think about our regulations with Upward Bound, we know that oftentimes we will serve students within our target schools, and that's where the majority of our focus of service delivery is. But we also spend some time recruiting in students if we're struggling within our target high schools, within the target community. So this next section will allow us to identify where and who were those students that were served. So you'll notice that in this particular section, we have an opportunity to identify the target schools. A lot of these will be populated, and will include some details, most specifically the NCESS school ID number. But you will need to update the number of students that were served at each of those schools, and if those schools were pre-approved. And then this should give you a total of the number of students that were served in the schools. You'll also have an opportunity to identify the number of students that were not at a target school. And this is that case where we're describing any students who might have been recruited within your target area. The number of students should total in the number of target schools and the number not at a target school to match the number of students that you served within the reporting period for 24-25. You'll notice that when you're in the web tool, this is a form. And so you'll need to click on the name of the school and choose edit the details so that you can update the numbers that you have served at each of these schools. What is also important to note is that if you served a new school, this is not the venue to try to request to get that new school added as a new school or a target school. That is a totally different process, which requires prior approval from your program specialist. So if those students in this case, it may be something that you have to wait on until, your program specialist is available to add those schools. And so if you happen to serve those students, you may have to include them in this number of students that did not attend a target school, okay? But do your due diligence with requesting the required permissions when they are required. Let's go ahead and begin thinking about this record structure. So I mentioned that, this particular annual performance report, and, we see this for, not just our upward bound, regular upward bound, but upward bound math science, our veterans upward bound program, student support services, the Ronald B. McNair program. All of these programs submit an Excel spreadsheet through the web portal. And once we've logged in, we upload this file and it goes through some quality control checks. And the particular control checks are looking for measures based on our program. So for Upward Bound, it's going to look for different responses to who were the students that were served within the reporting period? Why were they eligible? Why were they served? And how is it that you selected them? They'll also ask for some demographic information regarding the participants that we have served and who we have served in the past. And then they also want to know some information regarding the students, the schools that they were enrolled at when you started serving them, and how did those students do with respect to our objectives? Did they participate in particular activities, some of those required services? And then also, did they enroll in college? Were they ready to enroll in college and need any, for example, remedial coursework? And then did they earn any degrees? So we're telling this story about all of our Upward Bound students based on numbers and through responses. And these are all found within this record structure for the Upward Bound and Upward Bound Math Science projects. If you think about your Excel file and it's uploaded into this particular portal, all of the data gets input into the system, and the Department of Education can at any time go in and look at and pull records from this mainframe database and say, whose record is this? And so it's not uncommon to find that the first few identifying fields are to say, well, this is my student, this is from Colorado State University, or this is from your particular institution. So the first identifier, PR number, is your award number. So they know that this is a student that came from your institution and that you're providing some information. They also will use this information when they're generating some reports. So for example, if you go out to the Department of Education homepage, you'll see that on the homepage, there's typically a link that shows progress from all of the Upward Bound or Upward Bound Math Science projects. So you can go out and take a look at them. Oftentimes they might have a breakdown and they'll give information on each institution to say this is where they were at with respect to meeting program objectives and outcomes. So again, it's because of this process of responding appropriately to this very first field to indicate that it's your student. The next field, batch AY, allows us to respond to that this is a field, a record for this student for the 24-25 academic school year or program year. So we refer to that as batch AY 2024. So if you think about your Excel file, every student will have the same PR number and the same batch AY. Similarly, field number 3, type. Every student, if you're an upward bound program, will have a 1, and every student that's an upward bound math science will have a 2. Okay. If we continue thinking about this Excel file, all of our rows are our student records, and our database column name, so that 4th column will be the name of the column. If you happen to change or add any spaces, it will not find a match. And so you'll get an error message when you try to upload it. So ensure that you are keeping your column names with these database column names so that your file can be readily accepted. When we think about the next few fields, we begin now thinking about the students and who are those students that were served by our Upward Bound program. We see in field number 4, case number, that every student will have a case number. Well, when we're preparing our APR file and getting it ready for upload, the new students that were recruited in 24-25 will not have a case number until the completion of your APR submission. So you will prepare your Excel file with a blank case number for those students. The next, and at the very end, when you do download your Excel file, those case numbers will appear in the file that you download. Okay? And you'll need to update your database with those case numbers at that point. The next few fields allow us to begin identifying those students by last name, by first name, by middle initial, and date of birth. These particular fields of data, you'll notice that in the second to right, on the right-hand side, the column has a check mark indicating that once you report those students' information, you do not update this information. So in preparing this year's file, make sure your new students that the information is correct so that next year you won't find that you have to update any of that information. Okay. These fields are unique fields, and they are used to create a unique individual in this reporting structure. So that's why we want to ensure that that is correctly uploaded the first time that we report on those students. We'll continue to report on these students for a number of years, and we won't have any opportunity at that time to update their first name, last name, or date of birth. Okay. The next field of data is gender CD. Gender CD is a field that I believe there may be a change in the APR instructions once it comes out. And the reason is because of option number 3, non-binary or another gender. This was something that was updated last year, but it is not aligned with the current administration. So I'm anticipating that we'll see that option number 3 will be removed. The next few fields of data allow us to identify the students with respect to their ethnicity and their race. This will allow the students on applications to have responded to a particular questions regarding in field number 10, are they identified as Hispanic? And then allowing the additional fields to identify, to allow the student to self-identify whether they are American Indian, Alaska Native, Asian, Black African American, white, Native Hawaiian, or other Pacific Islander. Okay. One thing about the database file that once you upload it is that oftentimes you will get an error if you identify as Hispanic, yes, and you do not indicate white as yes. So if you get that error message, that's a common error message that we see at the APR website, because they kind of want to force you to indicate that that student is Hispanic and white. If the student is no in any of the other races. So please be prepared to see that, because that is a common error that we see in the APR reporting structure. The next few fields of data allow us to identify the student's eligibility with respect to first generation low income and this at-risk factor criteria. In field number 16, you'll notice that we have a couple of options, and I'm sorry, the lines didn't align in the instructions when we downloaded those, but it's really options 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 0. And the department uses this information for field number 16 to help identify whether you have not just met your numbers, but are in compliance with respect to serving 2/3 of students who are both first generation and low income. You'll also notice that the next few fields of data, field number 17, 18, and 19, allow you to respond to whether, if in field number 16, you identify that a student is at risk, that in one of those three fields, 17, 18, or 19, that you have to indicate with a 1 response if you indicate in field number 16 with an option number 4, 5, 6, or 7. This is a common error, so please look at your data, and most specifically your new participants, because that's typically where we find those errors when your file is uploaded to the APR website. Let's take a look at those at-risk criteria. Field number 17 is looking at whether the student is at risk because they have taken a standardized test and demonstrated that they are not proficient in reading, language arts, and math. You'll want to respond accordingly based on any records that you have on any state assessments to identify whether the student is identified at risk. Again, if the student in field number 17 is a 1, then you need to ensure in field number 16 that you've selected one of the appropriate eligibility criteria. In field number 18, we're looking at students who might be considered at risk because they are or have a GPA that is below 2.5. And so this is also an at-risk criteria. Any option number 1 will also need to make sure that you looked at field number 16 to identify an at-risk criteria. Field number 19 is at risk for algebra. And this is for students who, by the beginning of the 10th grade, had not successfully completed pre-algebra or an algebra course. So you'll want to respond accordingly based on the student's transcripts and their entering grade level to determine if they're at risk for algebra. There is one additional field that is coming up here in a bit that also is tied to those particular eligibility fields. But let's look at first limited English proficiency at the time of entry, and the next field, disconnected. For these two fields, you'll want to identify if at the time that the student was selected in field number 20, did they have a limited English proficiency? If they did, then you'll want to indicate yes or to no, or whether it is unknown. Later, when we look at one of the fields regarding the required services, they'll ask a question whether we provided any services or whether this participant was an active participant in a delivery of services where we address this limited English proficiency. Field 21 will respond to the question whether the student was disconnected. Are these students who, for example, were homeless, in foster care, in the juvenile justice system, or anything that meets those definitions for a disconnected youth? And one thing that's really important to note is that when the instructions are downloaded, when you've had an opportunity to take a look at them, is that there is a section that describes those definitions that apply. So please read those carefully. In field number 22, this is the one field that I mentioned is closely tied to the eligibility criteria. In field 22, they're asking if at the time of selection, what was the reason that the student was selected to participate in your Upward Bound or your Upward Bound Math Science program? So you will choose the response that closely identifies that reason. You'll notice that option number 16 indicates that there is a need that was identified in field 7. If in field at risk, you for GPA, test scores, or algebra, if you've indicated an option number 1, then you need to ensure that you select option number 16 in this other field, other need field. Otherwise, you will generate an error. Okay. But you'll notice that you have some of the main reasons that students were selected to participate in Upward Bound or Upward Bound Math Science. The next field, National Center for Education Statistics ID. This is a field number that is given to you from the NCESS website, and there's a link that's provided. But for the most of us, we have already been reporting on students that were our schools. But if you have other students, you can go out to this particular website and download the NCESS School ID. You'll notice that this particular field does give you some different options or values that you can use. If a student has no number, is a private or non-parochial school or a parochial target school, or was homeschooled, or it was not a target school. Okay, so remember, for those individuals that you may have recruited within your target area, since they are not a target school, you would use that option 999. In field number 24, here we'll respond to when the student first receives services from your project. It will be important to note that this date must be within the reporting period for a new student. So if you have a student that was recruited in 24-25, please make sure that that first date of entry, project entry date of their delivery of service, falls within this 24-25 reporting period. Otherwise, you could get an error message. I think one of the most common errors that are made is that we might indicate that this is a new student, but we entered them in last year's project year, and that is an error. And sometimes that error may have occurred because that student was new last year and we forgot to update their status to indicate that they're a continuing student. So one of the things that I like to do is look at my Excel file even before I upload it. Is that I like to filter my records and say, who are all of my new students? And I look at that project entry date, just so that I can ensure that there are no errors with this entry date. Okay. You'll also notice that, and not in this particular field, but there are some other date fields within this record structure that will ask you if to use the 15th of the month if you're not or don't have something that indicates this is happened on this particular date. So rather than put in any other date, they ask you to just use the 15th of the month. Okay. The next field number 25, and this is 25 out of the 67 fields that we have to respond to. And in field 25, we respond to what was that student's grade level at that first service date. So thinking about that date that we just entered, project entry date, what was that student's grade level? You'll notice that we have a number of different responses, and some of these responses you want to read carefully because sometimes they might reflect to recruiting that student during the academic year, and they're at a particular grade level. But these also have options to respond to, was that a rising ninth grader, for example, a student that you recruited during the summer program between their 8th and 9th grade. So choose appropriately. And again, these particular options align carefully to what your program start date is. And I mention that because you want to, again, read that carefully. It means something different for someone who might have a June 1 start date than for a project who might have a September 1 start date. So here, again, you want to choose the appropriate response that indicates what was that student's grade level at the time of entry into your project. We have two other fields that are very similar to this one, and so that's why it becomes very confusing. Okay, so for this one, choose what was that student's grade level on that date of first service. This is something that you will not change in the future. Okay, this grade level will always remain the same. In field 26, you'll identify whether a student has become deceased or permanently incapacitated. This information is information that is particularly important when assessing your objectives. Any participants that become deceased or incapacitated are removed from denominators or from groups of students that we're evaluating for particular objectives so that they do not impact your outcomes. Okay, so it's important that once you have information about this for participants that you update it accordingly. Field 27 is a critical field. It's a critical field because it allows you to identify the status of the students that have been served within the reporting period and those who have not been served. And so as to allow you to identify that they're a prior year participant that you're still tracking, because they may include somebody that you're tracking for degree attainment and in the case of math science for somebody who might be earning a degree within a STEM field. Let's go ahead and take a look at these options because, again, this is a critical field. A new participant is a participant that was served for the first time within the reporting period. A continuing student is a participant that was served last year in the 23-24 reporting period and again has been served in 24-25. A reentry participant is a participant that was served in a year prior to 23-24, was not served in 23-24, but now again has been served in 24-25. And so they are re-entering your program having had a gap year. Prior year participants, option number 4, are those individuals that have participated previously in your program but did not receive services in 24-25, yet you are still required to include them in your Excel file because either they will be approaching graduation or they will have enrolled in college, and we're trying to indicate whether they have earned a credential. Option number 6 allows us to respond to any participant who may have joined your program because they were a transfer student. They may have been served by another Upward Bound project or an Upward Bound project and are now being served by your project in 24-25. So you want to go ahead and choose one of these options. You'll notice that the department uses this value to determine whether you met your number funded to serve. So they will count within your Excel file the number of records where you have indicated a response of number 1, a number 2, number 3, or number 6. The sum of all of those options of 1, 2, 3, or 6 will identify the number of students that you served within the reporting period. And then they will use your response to field number 16, the eligibility CD field, to determine whether you are in compliance with respect to serving the number of students that were both first generation low income and or at risk for Upward Bound, and the number of students that were first generation low income for Upward Bound Math Science. Because remember, the Upward Bound Math Science project does not have an at-risk criteria, even though we still report whether a student is considered at risk. Okay, because that may have been one of the additional reasons why you may have in your Upward Bound Math Science brought the student into your project. Let's go ahead and look at the next field, participation level. And this is one area that I mentioned that there may be an update for projects who may have now transitioned from a June 1 to a September 1. You'll notice that last year, the options down highlighted in yellow and below were added last year. But for most other projects who didn't have a change, you could respond using options 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 4, 5, 6, and 0. For this particular field, the department is asking the question about when did the student receive program services and when were they actively engaged in receiving these services? Did they participate in the academic year? In the academic year in the summer, academic year and bridge, and in the academic year only or the summer only, or the summer bridge program? Or was this a student that you had identified in the Part CD field as being a prior year participant? And now in the participation level, you would choose option number 6 to indicate that it's not applicable. This was a prior year participant. You'll notice just below in the yellow, for those transitioning programs, they needed to provide some additional options to allow you to respond to whether you had, 2 summer programs in the 24-25 reporting period. And so we're anticipating that we might see something similar to these responses to allow you to indicate that that student participated during these various components and having option to respond to those. So again, once the instructions come out, please make sure that you read those carefully. Field number 29 is a field that allows us to respond to whether our students that we have served in Upward Bound and Upward Bound Math Science and whether they have participated in another program. So you'll notice that you have a couple of different options to indicate might have participated in both Upward Bound and Upward Bound Math Science, in Veterans, Talent Search, Gear Up, EOC, and another federally funded college access program. It's important to note that you think about this particular question about the participating in more than one program at the same time. If they participated, for example, in Talent Search, but then they transferred over to Upward Bound. If they left Talent Search before they started Upward Bound, then we're not indicating that here. They were not served at the same time by both programs, even though both programs in this example might have counted that student. Here, again, they're asking about whether those students participated at the same time in any one of these other federally funded programs. Field number 30 and 31 are 2 fields that closely align to that educational grade level field that we looked at a little bit earlier. But I like to look at these a little bit differently because remember, in this particular file, we're reporting on students that are not only new for the first time, but are continuing. And so their grade levels are being updated every year. So it's best if you think about field number 30, starting grade level, as being what was that student's grade level in the fall of 24. That will help you respond accordingly to this field, number 30, for starting grade level. And then in field number 31, use the fall of 25 to report the student's ending grade level. What they're using this particular field, 30 and 31 for, is to determine whether that student has progressed to the next grade level. They're also using this information to determine whether, for example, in the ending grade level, whether that student has also continued to pursue their post-secondary education program and or whether they have completed that post-secondary education program. In field 32, high school GPA, this is a field that is a critical field that is also used to determine whether you have met the GPA objective. You'll notice that you have some options to identify and respond to the GPA. You can enter a value that must be below a 4.0 in this GPA field, even though on your transcripts, some students may have a GPA above a 4.0, depending on the course load that they have completed. If it exceeds 4.0, you will get an error message. You'll also notice that you have an opportunity to respond with an 8.888 value. The 8.888 value is most used for students when they have been recruited at that rising 8th to 9th grade level. They were served in the summer, but they do not yet have a high school GPA. And so we will respond with an 8.888 value. If you have a summer program where your students, for example, a June 1 start date program, and your bridge program is at that beginning of the program year, then here, for those bridge students, you would also report using the 8.888 value. You'll notice that you have an option of 9.999 value to respond for any prior year participants, and a 0.000 value to respond for an unknown GPA. In evaluating this particular objective, the department removes any of those students where you have reported an 8.888 value in identifying the denominator of your students that were served within the reporting period, so as to not impact your outcome of your objective. So again, in evaluating that objective, because the objective itself indicates that of those students that were served, anybody that you coded as a new continuing reentry or transfer student, how many of those had a GPA of 2.5 or greater to meet that objective? Okay. So please note that those 888 values again are removed from that denominator so as not to impact you. The next field, 33, is a Government Performance and Results Act GPA. And so if you have that information readily available, because it's provided on the transcripts, then here you will go ahead and report that GPA. And you know what? I just realized I said that backwards. This is the objective that cannot exceed 4.0. The GPA objective can exceed. Okay, so please, again, read those instructions carefully. This particular field, unweighted GPA, again, is a GEPRA field that the department is running their own evaluations on to determine how many of the students have a GPA, a particular GPA that's unweighted. Field number 34, high school grad, is a critical field. This is a critical field because the Department of Education is trying to determine whether this student is currently enrolled in high school or whether they have graduated or whether they are a dropout or earned another high school equivalency credential. This field is also critical because in evaluating the outcomes for our students, and many of our objectives are now tied to those seniors. And so they want to know specifically how many of your students have received a regular secondary school diploma. And if they received a secondary school diploma, did those students complete a rigorous secondary school program of study? Did they enroll in college and earn a credential? Any individuals who were not identified as earning a regular secondary school diploma, meaning if they have earned an option number 1 or an option number 2 or an other or 4, for example, you cannot assign them a cohort, nor will they be evaluated for earning a credential. So this is why it's very important for you to review and have a really good understanding about what is a regular secondary school diploma for your state. We don't describe that here in detail because we have folks here joining us from all across the country who have different state standards. So please go back and review what are those regular secondary school diploma requirements that must be met for your school in order and in your state for that student to be identified as an option number 3 here. Once a student has been identified as graduating, then in field number 35, you'll identify the student's high school graduation date. For this annual performance report, the department is looking for not only the option number 3, but the students having graduated within this reporting period, depending on when your program, whether you have a June 1 or September 1 start date. Did the student earn a regular secondary school diploma? And if so, then those individuals, you can report on, did they complete a rigorous program of study? And then begin assigning them with a post-secondary education cohort. That field is coming up, so we'll go ahead and get to that here in a bit. Okay. It's important to note again that this information is readily verifiable and that you have transcripts to document that within your records in the event that you're ever audited. You'll notice that in high school grad, we had different options that allow you to respond to that student is unknown. Let's say, for example, we had somebody who we don't know if they graduated from high school. Then when we respond to the high school grad date, we need to use the option either unknown, or we can use the 999 values, meaning to indicate that the student it's either unknown or the student has dropped out of school, or they may still continue to be enrolled in college. Once you identify, for example, that the student has not graduated, then this will have an impact on how you respond to those particular fields that relate to the student's post-secondary enrollment data. And we'll get to that here in a bit. Okay. So we want to respond accordingly. In field number 36, rigorous study. This will allow us to respond to the student's objective regarding those students who graduated with a regular school diploma, and whether within the reporting period, so meaning within our school year, and did they complete a rigorous program of study. If it's an option number 1, then this is a success and will be counted favorably towards meeting your objective. An option number 2 means that the student did not complete a rigorous program of study. And then an option number 8 will be used for all other students because they are not a current year or a prior year student graduating within the reporting period. You'll notice that this particular rigorous study is very similar to that high school graduation, meaning that we have to have a really good understanding within our school districts and schools and within our states as to what is defined as a rigorous program of study. We also wrote about that within our grant applications. So if this is the first time that you're responding to that, or if you're not familiar with that, you may want to go back to your grant application and say, what did we indicate that we would review? We would have written it within the plan of operation, within the objectives section, and also within our evaluation plan to say this is what we would look at to determine whether we met a student met a rigorous program of study. Field number 37 is a field that's not applicable. We don't use this particular field to determine persistence. So every record will have a 5 value in it. Fields number 38 and 39 are critical fields. They are critical fields for those students that we have indicated have graduated with a regular diploma and indicating whether they were found proficient in reading, language arts, and math. So in field 38, you're specifically responding to whether the student was proficient in reading and language arts. And then I'm sorry, my great grandson is growling. So that's this noise that you hear them in the background. In field number 39, if that student is proficient in math, then you will respond accordingly with a field number, option number 3, or a no for a field option number 4. You'll also notice that in both of those fields, for a student who has not yet completed an assessment, you can choose the option number 9s. Or if they've taken it and you do not have access to those assessment scores, then you can choose the appropriate response of 0. What is important to note is that those particular fields, number 38 and 39, are critical to meeting that objective. You have to have a 3 in both of those fields for a senior in order to meet this objective. Okay. So please look at your responses and those test scores accordingly. Okay. and have a really good understanding again for what is identified as proficient at your state. Okay, because every state will have a different level of proficiency. In some cases, you have also noted that within your grant application. So again, familiarize yourself with it. Field number 40, AP course, is a GEPRA field. The department is interested in knowing whether the student that participated, whether they completed an AP course or whether they have completed an IB course. Now, they don't have to have passed it. The question is, did they complete the course? And so you would respond accordingly. In field 41 and field 42, these two fields of data allow you to respond to whether the students that have participated in your program have participated in a dual enrollment program at their high school. You'll notice that in field number 41, they're asking you whether the student is enrolled in this dual program as part of a fifth-year program or not. And they're also asking you in field number 42, whether the student, through their participation in the dual enrollment program, whether they earned a credential, a certificate, or an associate's degree. It's also important to note that in field number 42, when a student has participated in dual enrollment and earned a certificate or an associate's degree, that this is not construed within the APR as them having enrolled in post-secondary education. Here, you're simply reporting whether they earn those credentials. And then in those latter fields where we begin reporting on the students' enrollment in post-secondary education, they're looking at post-secondary education enrollment after high school. So some of that quality control testing that happens within our particular file is meant for us to get that story straight, right? They graduate from high school and then they enroll in college. And then later on down the road, after high school graduation, that enrollment happens and that degree attainment happens, okay? So here, this is the only real place in field number 42 for you to indicate that the students have actually earned either a certificate or an associate's while they were in high school and participating in this dual enrollment program. Field number 43 is a GEPRA field. The department is interested in knowing whether the students have completed advanced math beyond Algebra 1 in high school. So you'll want to use their transcripts so that you can assess, did they complete math beyond 2 years beyond Algebra 1. Okay, again, with that understanding of what is that traditional math path that the students take within your schools. Field number 44, FAFSA, is also a GEPRA field. Here, they're interested in finding out whether these students who graduated with a regular diploma, whether they completed a FAFSA application. And so you'll need to respond accordingly. Field number 45 and field number 46 allow you to respond to a student who left your program and the reason and the date that they left your program. So in field 45, you'll identify when was that last date of service. And then in field number 46, you'll indicate the reason why the student left your program. It's important to note that if you identify a student, because this is a common error that's made, is that if you indicate, for example, in this batch file record that you're going to upload for a student, if you indicate that that student is a prior year participant, then you must have provided a last served date that is prior to the start of your program year for 24-25. That's a real common error, so please look at those records accordingly. In field 46, you'll see some of those reasons, some of the major reasons why students have left our programs. Hopefully, a lot of it's because option number 8, they've graduated from high school. But you'll notice again that there are other reasons. The next few fields of data allow us to respond to some of those required services. Back in 1999, when we were getting ready for this, there were actually 99 or 100 fields of data that we would respond to. And it was because all of these required services were noted. However, we were able to get the department to consider only these 4 fields. And so now we're able to respond to these 4 or 5 fields of required fields to respond to whether students who participated in our program actually engaged in these activities. So we'll see in field 47, work study. Did you write into your grant that the students were participating in a work study component? And if so, did those students participate? In field number 48, I'm sorry, the baby is making all these weird sounds.
I thought I heard something. I thought I heard something. I can barely hear him though.
In field 48, they're asking whether the student is employed, and yes, was the student employed because the job was arranged by the project, or was it because the student found employment on their own? Or the option number 4, no, they weren't employed. Field number 49 is cultural activities. So again, you would respond to whether the student was engaged in any cultural activities that were hosted by your program. In field number 50, here they're asking whether the student that was served during the reporting period, whether they engaged in any community service and whether this was, offered by the project or not. In field number 51, this is that one field that I mentioned earlier, that if a student was identified as having a limited English proficiency, whether that student participated in any instruction or tutoring that helped address their need for limited English proficiency, and you would respond accordingly. The next few fields of data now allow us to begin telling the story about those students' enrollment in post-secondary education. And so we'll need to use some information that we typically find from the National Student Clearinghouse. It could also be information with respect to identifying students, from the FAFSA, the institutional codes. So you can use some of that information. But we also have some links that are, again, defined within the application itself to help us provide some responses to the students' enrollment in college. We'll identify not only their enrollment, but their persistence in college. Okay? So in field number 52, here we'll identify the source of information. Where did we capture that information? You'll notice that we have a couple of different options, whether it was obtained from the transcript, the college transcript, the institution, reported by the participant. Many of us use the National Student Clearinghouse, so we use option number 8. But you'll also notice that within the next few fields of data that we also have different options. So option values number 8. The option values number 8 allows us to respond to these fields of data, which we cannot leave blank for our students. For example, those 9th, 10th, and 11th graders who've not graduated, or a student that we don't know if they graduated. We will, in the next few fields of data, use option number 8. This is not applicable because they've not yet completed high school. Also, we have an option number 9. So for students that do not enroll in college, we might use a series of 9 values in the next few fields of data to say that this student has completed high school, but they did not enroll in post-secondary education. Nor were they ever assigned a cohort that we would track because they did not enroll. And so we would respond with, again, those series of 9 values. In most cases, even though we have an option 0 of unknown, we should limit the option values of unknown. We should know, where did we get this information that we reported they were in college? Field number 53 allows us to respond that when did this student first enroll in post-secondary education? You'll notice that we can provide a date, but we also have some different options. The 666 values allows us to say this is a student who was accepted in post-secondary education institution, but their enrollment was deferred. Okay, so it wasn't the student that made that difference. It was the institution that said, you cannot enroll, for example, until the spring of 2026. And so here we would use that 6 value date to indicate this enrollment by deferment. You'll also notice that 8 value and that 9 value for someone who did not enroll in post-secondary ed. And again, even though we have the unknown option, we should try our best to find when did that student first enroll in college. In field number 54 is a critical field. It's a critical field because it will now identify a student when they graduated from high school and the year that they first enrolled in post-secondary education. This year allows the students for us to continue to have up to those 6 years of them being able to earn an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree. And we will track these students based on these cohorts and respond accordingly so that we can earn some prior experience points if the number of students that we reported in a particular cohort and whether they earn those credentials. You'll notice that when the instructions come out, any prior years prior to 2019 will be removed, and 2019 will be the program year that we're tracking for this 6-year degree attainment rate. So if you think about it, that group of students who enrolled in the fall of 2019, so in 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, and 25. So by the end of August 31st of 2025, did that student earn an associate's or a bachelor's degree is the group that we will be responding to and earning prior experience points. You'll also notice that when the instructions do come out, they're going to add this PSE cohort for 2025. So as to allow us to report those students who've now graduated by August of 2025. And again, that by August of 2025 is critical. And whether they have enrolled in post-secondary education by this fall of 25 or through deferment spring of 26. Any of those students that do meet that measure will be reported in the 2025 cohort. It's important to note that once you identify a student in a cohort, you cannot change that cohort, nor can you add students later on. So this year, we have to report those 2025. We cannot go back next year and add students to 2025 if we find out after the fact that, and after the APR was submitted, that they actually did enroll in college. You cannot. Okay, so we need to repeat that. You cannot go back and add any students to these cohorts, okay? Nor can you change those cohorts. In fact, when you submit your Excel file to the APR website, it's really going to go through 2 screenings. The first screening is going to determine who's on that Excel file based on these particular PSE cohorts and let you know if anybody is missing. If they are missing from that Excel file, it will prompt you to go back to your database, add in these students, and maybe even fix their PSE cohorts if you happen to update it, and fix it back to the way it was, and then resubmit your Excel file. And then if it's accepted, then you'll proceed to the next quality control check, where it will then give you a listing of any error fields that you might have, okay? So please do not update that PSE cohort, because that's that very, very first hurdle that you have to overcome in submitting your APR. The next field, 55, allows you to respond to the institutional code. And so, again, you have a link here for the studentaid.gov website where you will identify the institutional code of where the student enrolled. If the student changes schools, you don't have to update that. And let's say if they went from the 2-year to a 4-year now, a couple years later, you do not have to update. This is where the student first enrolled in post-secondary education. You'll notice that you have a couple of different options of different values that you can use, including options that are, excuse me, not found in that school code directory, or this is a student that has not yet completed high school or enrolled in college. The next field, 56, allows us to track persistence of students and their enrollment in post-secondary education. You'll notice that as we report the very first student, we can say that this is their first year that they enrolled in college. So for example, the 2025 cohort will report PSE grade level option number 2. Option number 1 might be used for a student who has a deferred enrollment. And then for any students, for example, in this Excel file, you may have had students from the 2019, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24 cohort. And if they're continuing to be enrolled beyond the first year, then you would choose option number 3. For students who have completed a program but are continuing to be enrolled in post-secondary education, you would choose an option number 4. So a good example of this might be a student who earned an associate's degree. You reported in the associate's degree field that they earned an associate's, but maybe now they're pursuing a bachelor's. You could choose option number 4. For a student who may have earned the credential that they were seeking, whether it was even a certificate or an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree, and they're no longer enrolled pursuing any other credentials, you would choose option number 5. What is important to note that if you indicate that they're continuing to be enrolled, there is some error checking on this. So let's say, for example, that I've indicated that in my field that they earned an associate degree. But if I happen to choose option number 3, that they're continuing because I say, oh, they earned an associate's, they're still working towards getting a bachelor's, and I leave the value number 3, I would get an error message because the appropriate response would have been 4, that they're enrolled. They completed a program of study, which is acknowledged through my indication of putting an associate degree date in my example, and they're continuing to be enrolled. So my appropriate response would be 4 rather than a 3 there. So please watch for that quality control error checking that might happen with this PSE grade level. Option number 5, they've completed, they're done. And then option number 7, if the student has left the post-secondary education program that they were pursuing for any reason, you would choose option number 7 to indicate that they left the program without completing it. Option number 8s and 9s, we've spoke about before, meaning that this would be a response for a student who's not yet completed high school, or they're never enrolled in a post-secondary education program, or an option number 10, and other response would be something that doesn't fall into any one of these other categories, or an option number 11, if I'm indicating that this is a student that had a deferred enrollment. Okay? So again, choose the appropriate response. There's some error quality control checking on that field, but please note that it's being used again for tracking post-secondary persistence. Okay. The next field, 57 and 58 kind of go hand in hand, because in field 57, they're asking the question, did this student earn a certificate? And again, they're asking about a certificate that might have been earned after high school graduation. And so in field 57, if you indicate a response number 1, then in the field number 58, certificate date, you want to indicate the date that that certificate was earned. Now, remember, in Upward Bound and Upward Bound Math Science, we are not earning any prior experience points for certificates that might be earned. However, they are asking you the question whether a certificate was earned. You'll notice that in field number 57, you also have an option of 2, and then in the certificate date, you have an option of using the 222 values. If the student is an Upward Bound or Upward Bound Math student, science student who is not pursuing a certificate, then you want to use the option number 2 in field number 57 to indicate they're not pursuing a certificate. And then in the certificate date field, 58, you would use the 222 dates. You'll also notice that you have an option number 3 to respond to whether the student is pursuing a certificate. If the student is enrolled in a certificate program, then you would choose the option number 6, and this would align carefully again in field option number 58 of using the 6 values. Option number 7, if the student left their certificate program, then also in the certificate date, you would use the matching 7 values to indicate that the student has left their programs. Again, you see options 8 and 9 to allow you to respond to students who've not yet graduated or did not enroll in post-secondary ed. Okay, let me kind of stop here on certificate date so that you could see those various date options that I was responding to. So again, in 57, if you chose value 2, you would use 222. If you use 3, you would use 333, and so on. Okay, so again, here we're responding to whether the students earned a certificate or not. Field 59 and field number 60 are very similar to the certificate CD field and the associate degree date. You would indicate, did they attain an associate's degree, and then option number 1 and provide the date in the associate degree date. If they weren't pursuing it, again, you would use option number 2s, and then in associate degree date, you would use the 2 values as well. So again, these allow you to respond accordingly to whether those were credentials that might have been earned, that was, if that's what the students were pursuing, okay? In field number 61 and 62, we see similar. Here, we're responding to whether the students earned a bachelor's degree and the date that the bachelor's degree date was earned. If the student was not pursuing a bachelor's degree, we would do this something similar to what we did with certificate CD and associate degree, meaning we would choose the option number 2's values to say the student was not pursuing a bachelor's degree. Those are all critical fields that once we have reported that they have earned those credentials, we should not change it. The Department of Education also uses information that we have provided within those few fields of data regarding degree attainment to help run their own performance standards report. Meaning they're trying to determine whether a student took 2 years to earn that associate's, whether it took 3 years or whether it took 4 years. So they are running, again, their own statistics to determine how long it really takes for upward bound and upward bound math science students to earn these various types of degrees. Let's go ahead and go to the next field. And we're quickly coming to the end of the field structure, okay? Field number 63 allows us to respond to whether students that graduated, so remember that high school grad field and that high school grad date field. They want to know of those students that we indicated graduated with a regular diploma within the reporting period, whether they enrolled in post-secondary education by the fall term, option number 1, or option number 2, whether they enrolled through deferred enrollment in the spring of 2026. So options 1 and 2 are indicating those students enrolled in post-secondary education. We have provided the information within those previous fields that we just looked at in field, for example, bachelor CD. If we chose option number 6, let me go back to that field. If we chose, for example, in bachelor CD option number 6, that the student enrolled in a bachelor's degree program, in bachelor's degree date, we would enter the 666 values to indicate that that's the student is now part of the 2025 cohort enrolled in a bachelor's degree program. And so within this field of data that we are looking at now, PSC enrolled objective numerator, they're saying, okay, if you indicated through those fields that they enrolled in college, did they enroll by the fall or through deferred enrollment? If you had a student that was a prior year participant that graduated but did not enroll in post-secondary education, then they would be in option number 3, meaning graduated, regular secondary school diploma, no post-secondary ed. And so for those students, we would not have indicated, for example, a cohort year, because we would have chosen option number 999 to indicate that the student is not pursuing post-secondary education. For those students that we have indicated that they have graduated, enrolled in college through this field 63, they want to know now in field 64, did that student need to take courses or remedial coursework in college level math or English? And so if the student did not have to take any remedial coursework because they had already or were able to successfully enroll in college level math or English in the fall or will in the next term, then you can choose option number 1, that they did not have a need for or receive college level math or English remediation. Option number 2, if the student did need some remediation, then you would choose that option. For all other students that did not enroll in post-secondary education, you would choose option number 9 because they are not in the cohort that is being measured for post-secondary enrollment. Field number 65 allows us to respond to our degree attainment for the cohort, the 2019 cohort, that has now had an opportunity of 6 years for students to be enrolled for 6 years, and whether they have earned either an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree. You'll notice that in field essentially what the tool does is it takes your Excel file and it looks at that student cohort year. And so if you're thinking again about your Excel file and you filter that Excel file with the PSE cohort 2019, that would be your denominator. And now they want to know out of those students, how many earned an associate's or a bachelor's degree. So you would indicate a 1 in this field if they did earn that associate's or bachelor's, a 2 if they did not earn that associate's or bachelor's, or you would indicate for every other record an option number 9 indicating they were not in that 2019 cohort. In the case where it's unknown, you do have an opportunity to use 0 for unknown because you don't know if they earned a associate's or a bachelor's. But again, similar to the comment that we've made before, unknowns usually count against you. Field number 66 is a field that is responded to by Upward Bound Math Science programs. For this particular field of data, this is a GEPRA field as well. The department is interested in finding out whether these students that were Upward Bound Math Science students and whether they earned a post-secondary degree in a STEM field. And so you'll notice we have a couple of different options to allow you to respond to the type of degrees that were earned by these students. You'll also note that if a student, if you're a regular Upward Bound program, then you would respond with option number 8 to indicate that this was a student that was in a regular Upward Bound program. And so I'm not tracking whether they earned a STEM major or not, okay? You'll also notice that you have option number 9 for Upward Bound Math Science programs for students where this was a student that was not on your file in the 2019 cohort. Okay. The very last field that we will report on is an optional field. I mentioned early on that when we're looking at the record structure, that the student's first name, last name, and date of birth cannot be changed, and or the cohort. And so if you happen to have a student who had, for example, a legal name change, then in this field 67, this is your opportunity to identify, this is the additional name that I'm tracking this student. You would not, again, change those other fields. Those are critical fields. And this is really your only opportunity to indicate that there is a name change. So with that, Lisa, we're at 126 or 226. So we've gotten through all of them in an hour and a half. So is there anything, Lisa, that you'd like to add?
Yes, I'd like to say, by the time we have left, can we go back to field 41? I have a
Sure.
question here, and I'll state the question, and I think the answer is in the instructions, but field 41, college in the high school versus running start, which I'm not familiar with, it's in capital letters, or are
Mhm,
both considered dual enrollment here?
mhm, mhm,
I do know, just before you answer your question there, on the instructions, the other
mhm,
document that Lourdes updated for us with the years, please look at page 23 and 20. Oh, no, I'm wrong. Please look at page 19 and 20 of the APR instructions. That gives you a nice little definition about what they consider dual enrollment, which I
mhm,
think this person is asking. College in the high school versus running start, or are both considered dual enrollment here?
mhm,
College and
mhm.
high school, I believe so.
Yeah, and so again, you definitely want to look at what are the programs that they have. The dual enrollment program is really that agreement with your schools and with either the community colleges or the four-year colleges that might be in your area. And that agreement is that that student will participate and earn college credits. Um, because they're participating also in the high school and that experience, that dual enrollment experience. So it's typically that agreement, okay? And
And
sometimes those agreements might be a 5-year agreement. So, and we're seeing more and more of our schools that are engaging this because those students are wanting to graduate, having earned a certificate or a associate's degree by the time they graduate from high school. And so if that you have to think about what's the standard number of years that it takes for that student to graduate within this dual enrollment program. Is it part of a 5-year program? Meaning that they're going to stay 5 years in high school and earn that certificate, certificate or associates within that 5 years. Are they enrolled in that dual enrollment program? Because it only takes 4 years, right? The 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. So there is no 5th year, but it is a dual enrollment program. Now, students who are I'm going to take a class at the community college because either it's not offered here, it may not be part of that dual enrollment program. It may be just a student saying, I want to get a jump start. So that would be, I'm not in a dual enrollment program. I'm just taking a college class, right? And so um, um, in field 42, you would respond to, no, the student was never in a dual enrollment program, but they took a college class, right? So
mhm.
again, read carefully the instructions, understand what's happening within your agreements, within your high schools and those community colleges. And is this really a dual enrollment program? They'll all might go by different names as in this example, but it's that dual enrollment agreement that you're looking for. Okay.
Great. Thank you, Lourdes. Also, someone says, can we get the link to the trainings that were offered at the beginning of the presentation? You sure can. Plus, you can always go to our website, go to the NEC shop. Everything's
Mhm.
there. And we do have our YouTube channel. If you just type in Nosotros Education Center,
Mhm.
NOSOTROS Education Center, and it'll take you, and there's a playlist there and
Mhm.
a lot of free
Mhm.
resources as well. We'll put that in the link as well.
Mhm.
And it'll be in the blog post. We
Mhm.
always
Yeah.
say that you can follow and you can get all our recordings. Everything free is on there. And yeah, lots of
Mhm.
thank you so much, Lourdes. Lots of positive
Uh-huh.
feedback here coming about how thorough and what a great training this was to go through
Uh-huh.
the fields. Thank you all so much for
Uh-huh.
joining us.
Yeah.
Yes, just Lourdes, I don't know if you have any parting
No, no,
words.
just you all definitely download the forms and all those documents because they are not out at the APR website from the department. Again, I don't know how long it's going to be shut down for or how long or when it's going to be updated.
Mhm.
Given the shutdown. But you can do all of this work ahead of time. You can get ready. Most of that detail again is available once the APR website does go live. continue to monitor the department's homepage, especially that trio.ed.gov website, because that's when you'll find links to the updated documents. We've tried to do our best by updating, the current information and are anticipating where we might see some changes. But, something new could come up at the last minute. But be particularly careful, especially with your responses to those competitive preference priorities. You really give those some thought. Again, I think I'll be ready. We're all in a good place. Just remember to log in again if you have a change in the director, if you have a change in your certifying official, because those are the ones that might cause some trouble. Don't wait till the very end to get their permissions set, because sometimes it could take a couple of weeks. What happens is that you will fill out the form through the APR web portal to identify your certifying official or request for your certifying official to be updated. That sends a message to the contractor who is only maintaining the APR website. They forward your request to the program specialist who then approves it and then lets them know it's okay for that certifying official to now be in the system. It's not the contractor who is giving you that permission. It's that relaying of messages to the department that is doing that. Okay. So don't wait till the very end. And then read carefully when those APR submission dates are due, when that certifying official signature is also required. So
But they
those are
really,
things to really stay on top of.
sorry, but they really can't actually check right now because
Oh,
everything's
yes.
down. Yeah.
Yes, and that's a great point, Lisa. The APR tool is down. Until that site goes live, you won't be able to access it. Okay, that's where we're saying monitor it. You will not be able to get into the APR website until that site is live. Okay.
And remember, everybody, the instructions, what Lourdes was showing you on screen, and the instructions that I was referring to during the presentation is in the Google Drive that was sent to you all within the link when you registered. Donna has posted it once again. And then people are asking about the recording. So I'm going to say it again. 3 places to get the recording. Number one, if you register to attend the webinar and you're here with us, you're going to get a follow-up email. And that follow-up email will say, thank you for joining us. And then here's a link to the Google Drive and a link to the recording. If for some reason, like last week, I forgot to put the link to the recording, the second option is we're going to post about it on our blog post on our NEC website. You just have to be a free member. Some of y'all may not be free members yet. You go there in order to read our blog posting. You put in your email address. And if you get sick of us posting, then you can always unsubscribe. You can become a free member. Donna's putting that in the link as well. That's the second way you can get a blog post that has the link to the Google Drive that has these materials. Last year's materials too, a couple of tips. My Bloomin' tips if you're using Bloomin'. And also that blog post will have a link to the recording. Then the third way to get this is when in doubt, go to our YouTube channel, go to YouTube, type in Nosotros Education Center, and you'll see our channel and you'll see a playlist of all our webinars, including all our APR webinars there. So that's 3 places you can get the recording. Okay. And let's see here. Unfortunately, I will not be at SWASEP. So have a good time there. I'll be thinking of y'all, but we are planning to go into Texas Trio. So look for us there for sure. So Lourdes, thank you again so much for everything, your experience and the way you explain things. I mean, I could just sit here and listen to you all day. Thank you so very much. And Lourdes is right. I mean, get working on that APR. And if I'm gonna probably do a Bloomin' APR. So for those of you using Bloomin', which I know we did a poll earlier, but I'll put that out there too. I'll talk to Donna. She's gonna remind me. You said you're gonna do a Bloomin' APR. I may do it live or I may do it recording and put it on the channel and also as a blog post for those of you that are using Bloomin' specifically. Okay. So thank you so much.